Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, Gordon Giltrap. Gordon, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
So, well, thank you for taking the time to join us. You have had a very interesting career in as much as you've been able to touch on a lot of different styles of music while staying true to yourself throughout it.
Well, that's very true. I mean, next year I celebrate, and even I find it hard to believe, except when I look in the mirror and I see this long grey hair. I celebrate 60 years in the music business.
Wow.
And, I've met some amazing people, worked with some amazing people, and have had the privilege to make a living out of something I enjoy, which really is a privilege, isn't it, Michael? I mean, not many people have that. But I've been living the dream for a long time. Although being a self-employed musician is tough at times, trying to make ends meet. In the early days, I had a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage to pay, and so you just do what you can really to get the money in. If necessary, I had to sell a few instruments, which I still do occasionally, but not so much for the money, but for the fact that if an instrument isn't being played, it should go to a new home. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, tell me this. You're saying you're approaching 60 years into your career. When you were 12 and you first started playing, where did you have any hopes or aspirations that it would turn into what it has?
Not at all. I mean, my hope was when I left school, but that was denied me because my father thought otherwise. I wanted to go to art college because I loved painting and I love English. So I think I could have got a couple of O-levels to get me into art college, but that wasn't to be. So basically, left school at 15 with no qualifications and just took life as it came. I loved playing the guitar, but never took that seriously. The only time I took it seriously was when somebody actually said to me, you're a really good guitarist. And I didn't think that, because most of my guitar playing was done to a small number of people and in my bedroom, like a lot of bedroom players, trying to emulate the music of the day. A lot of it American music, funnily enough, because my influences from the word go was a guitarist called Hank Marvin, who was in a band called the Shadows. Right, you may have heard of them over in the States, along with their vocalist Cliff Richard. And then the Beatles came along and changed everything, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
And I started to get into acoustic music. And the thing that attracted me about acoustic guitar and the songwriting genre was the fact you didn't need anybody else. You could just march to the beat of your own drum and do what you wanted. And along the way, of course, I was listening to people that really changed my life with what they were doing, namely a man called Bert Jansch, and then another man called John Renbourn, particularly Bert's first album, which was life-changing. Ironically, Neil Young was also moved by the music of Bert Jansch, along with Jimmy Page, along with a whole generation of acoustic players in the 60s. So I was one of many, really. The other one was Donovan. I love what Donovan was doing. And I wanted to be a folk singer, but I didn't know where to get the material from. So I was listening to a lot of Scottish music, and a lot of songbooks which would actually been originated from America, a lot of the American folk songs. And that's where it started. But the life-changing thing was Bert Jansch. And I couldn't grasp how one man could get all that going. His guitar playing was like phenomenal. His songwriting was poetry. And it changed my life. And I thought, that's what I want to do. And I thought, wouldn't it be great? My ambition then was just to make a living out of something I loved. I had no desire or any dreams of becoming famous, whatever that is. I just wanted to make a living out of it. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to make an album? So I managed at the age of 18 to secure a recording contract with a very esoteric record label called Transatlantic that had my heroes recording for them, which was really good. So I felt like I was part of that stable. And that's really when I took myself seriously. I said when somebody said you play good guitar, and I didn't know that, and I thought, yeah, it'd be great to make a living out of this because I had nothing to lose. I had no qualifications. I had no fancy degrees to give up. I had no university education, so the only way was up. I had nothing to lose, and there's a little still voice in my head that kept saying to me, "I think you could do this. I think you could do this." There you go.
Do you remember, one of the moments where you had that realization where you're playing and all of a sudden, and then, like, you know what, this just might work?
I think the realization came when an amazing man, a legendary record producer over here in the UK called Bill Leader, who got in touch with me via the record company and said, I think we want to sign you to the label. But it was at that time I was working on a building site, doing manual labor, construction, that kind of thing. And it would be a good 2 years before that first album came out in '69. And I then thought, this is crazy, why don't I just go for it and see if I can make a living out doing concerts or doing gigs. In those days, it was probably the same in the States, but you had to go around and do little floor spots at clubs to get known. There's no shortcut. And if the organizer liked you, you might get a return gig. It was hard slog. And that amazing film, I'm sure you've seen it, called A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan biopic, which I thought was fantastic, I've got to say. I think it really captured the whole atmosphere of Greenwich Village in the early 60s and the young Dylan. And I related to it because my exposure was in London around the Soho clubs like the Marquee, Les Cousins in Greek Street, the Troubadour, all these three clubs where a lot of the legends played. Like the Troubadour, Paul Simon played regularly, And in Les Cousins, you had people like Jimi Hendrix dropping in on an all-nighter session. This was the 60s, Michael, and it was, you don't realise how amazing it was because you were there. It was only when you look back and you think that was a golden age. And how fortunate I was to be of the age to embrace all that and be part of it, and be part of that melting pot of music, that was around then. Sadly, no more. The music business has changed. I don't think it really exists anymore the way it did. In those days, you'd be with a label and they would usually work with you on 3 albums until eventually something happened. And I was very fortunate in that direction.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I had read, before we get too far down the road here, I don't know if it's true or not, but I'd read that you, Marty Wilde, and Albert Lee all grew up like in close proximity to one another. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. I only found this out. I knew that Marty Wilde I was born in Kent, right? And it sounds very posh, a place called Tunbridge Wells, the Royal Borough of Tunbridge Wells, which is very posh. I was only born there because there was a place called the British Home for Mothers and Babies. And mothers in London would be sent out there to have the children because there was nowhere in London. It'd been bombed, you see. And so I was born there, but I was brought up in southeast London, a place called Deptford. And then we moved to a place called East Greenwich. Now there's East Greenwich and West Greenwich. West Greenwich still is a great place to live. A lot of very wealthy people live there. But East Greenwich was the mean streets. And so I was kind of brought up in the mean streets. And when I got to know Albert Lee, because I knew Albert lived in a place called Kidbrooke, which was about, I guess, 3 miles from where I lived, maybe. But he was brought up originally in a place called Tunnel Avenue, which was literally a few yards from where I lived in Blackwall Lane. Now, Blackwall Lane was the lane that led up to a tunnel that was built in Victorian times called the Blackwall Tunnel that went under the Thames. Okay, so he lived in Tunnel Avenue. And I said to him, I said, Albert, I live just up the road from there in Blackwall Lane. How come we didn't meet? He said, well, we moved up to Kidbrooke pretty early on. He said, but were you scared to go out in case you got beaten up? I said, yeah, absolutely. because we were both only children, both very sensitive, you know. And and Marty Wilde literally lived around the corner in East Greenwich up until the time he became famous. And the whole London thing, where I eventually moved to a place called Grove Park, was where John Mayall lived, right? And at that time, Eric Clapton was lodging with him. So all this stuff was happening around London, you know, which you didn't know. But that southeast London really was a hotbed of musicians. It is a bit like Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck, isn't it? The Surrey scene and Kingston College of Art. You don't realise, and they didn't realise, but you know, it's almost like synchronicity. It's almost like the law of attraction that these people eventually would come together. I mean, unfortunately, I've never worked with Albert, but he and I are very, very close friends, and I love him like a brother. And I'm very proud to know him, because what did he do? He went to America and gave you your music back, but unbelievably better, I think. But there you go.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm always intrigued how there are certain locations where they just seem to breed musicians. Yeah, or you know, even cities like Lubbock, Texas, which is a small town, but there's just been so many people that have come out of there. Yeah, the biggest being Buddy Holly.
Holly.
Yeah. So, but say it just always intrigues me when you find little areas where all this talent comes from.
It is incredible, isn't it? I'm trying to think of other places that were like that, where this kind of group of musicians were brought up. But I think obviously Surrey, where Clapton and Jeff Beck and Page were, and then me with East Greenwich, Southeast London. And of course, since then, I found out that other musicians over here, there's a band called Squeeze. I don't know if you've heard the Squeeze in the States. Well, they're all from Southeast London. They're all from Blackheath and Cholton, where I went to school. And Jules Holland from Blackheath. So it's all in that area. Literally a bus ride away from all these people. And we didn't know it. But and famous actors as well. Gary Oldman from New Cross, which is my very first job when I left school was in New Cross. Again, a pretty tough old area. Steve Harley, the late Steve Harley, has recently died. He was actually born in Deptford, where I grew up. I didn't know that until recently. So it's that whole London thing. It's like this south of the river was a lot of stuff happening, Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always amazed me. It's like the in the States, we had Stax Records, which was a Memphis, Tennessee soul label. And most of the talent came directly within the neighborhood surrounding the record company. And when you look at the list of people who were on there, it's just amazing. And you think about these people all came from within blocks, or a lot of them, I shouldn't say not all, but a lot of them came within walking distance of Stax.
Yeah, it's amazing that, isn't it? I thought of another name as well, the actor Michael Caine. He was from, again, south of the river, a place called the Elephant and Castle, the Old Kent Road, which wasn't that far from where, again, just a bus ride. So, I mean, somebody's got to come from somewhere, really, I guess. But yeah, these places that are hotbeds of, I mean, these legends, like with Stax Records, I mean, the names just go on, don't they? That all from that area. You just can't get your head around that.
Yeah, Motown was the same way.
Yeah, really? Again, from the area? Detroit, right?
Yes.
Yeah, good point, actually. That's a very interesting thing that I didn't realize it had spread so far worldwide, that there would be these pockets of people that became legends and changed the world with their music. But they didn't know that. Neither none of us do. When we're doing stuff, we just do what's in our heart. I've been privileged to make a few albums over the years. One in particular in 1976 called Visionary, which was I come from that kind of folk thing, the folk folk background, acoustic guitar, although I'm not a folk musician, I'm inspired by. My grandfather was Irish. So therefore, I kind of kid myself that is in the blood, the Celtic thing, you know. But it is a very, very interesting thing. Very interesting.
Yeah. Now, when you started playing guitar, were you already into music? Were you constantly listening to the radio, searching out new music?
Well, I was listening to the Everly Brothers. Oh, wow.
You can't go wrong there.
The Everly Brothers, yeah. Listen to the Everly Brothers. I mean, the rock and roll thing, Jerry Lee Lewis, all that kind of stuff. I was listening, but it didn't influence me. One artist did influence me, ironically, was Paul Anka.
Oh, okay.
Canadian, with that hit he had with Diana, which I loved. I kept listening to it, but of course there was no guitar in it. It was saxophone, but I just loved the exhilaration of it, and that really drew me to it. But yeah, I was listening to the Everly Brothers, and then the Shadows came along, and of course at that time we had a thing called skiffle with a man called Lonnie Donegan,
right?
That influenced a whole bunch of people. So that was the early stuff I was listening to, and all those people influenced me as a musician, particularly Pete Townsend. I forgot to mention Pete. So the timeline, if you like, it started with, in terms of guitar, Hank Marvin, the Beatles, Pete Townsend, Bert Jansch, John Renbourn, and then I got into classical music and early music, listening to that kind of stuff. So that's my kind of chronological thing in terms of guitar influences.
Yeah. Tell me this. What was the Who song that really made you a Townsend fan?
Well, it's got to be My Generation. It's My Generation because I was a 16-year-old mod growing up in London. I loved the mod scene. I loved it because of the fashion, and if you look cool, you might get girls. You might be attracted to women. But first of all, it was My Generation, and then it was Substitute. And that was then. And of course, everything that Townsend did, because he is a towering genius, one man wrote all that stuff. And I'm very pleased to say he's a very dear friend of mine. And I was chatting to a dear friend recently, and I said, it's incredible. All the people that changed my life with their music eventually became my friends. And I said, well, how did that happen? I mean, and she was very complimentary. She said, well, there's something about you that they like. They obviously like me, okay? Maybe it was the lack of ego, I think, because I was always in awe. I still am in awe of other people. It's never me, you always aspire to be as good as somebody else. I wanted to be Bert Jansch. I wanted to be him. I wanted to look like him. I wanted to dress like him. I wanted to talk like him. I wanted to have his genius, which is crazy. But that's I think that's a male thing, Michael. I think that's guys kind of they follow trends. They're kind of herd animals, as opposed to women who kind of plow their own furrow, I think. But yeah, that was the thing, and I just loved playing the guitar. I started out trying to copy the Shadows. I was in a group called the Young Ones when I was 14, playing lead guitar, and I suppose I was quite good. No way was I a genius. I was just trying to copy what my heroes were doing. And then, of course, it was the Beatles trying to play what they were doing and trying to learn their songs. I think the thing about the Beatles was I got a Beatles songbook and I couldn't understand the chords. The chords are so complex. So I can't play this. It's more than 4 chords. And I never was a copyist. I mean, as I've got older, I have been able to take pieces that I love and replicate them note for note and put my own stamp on them. I can't do that now. In the early days, it was easier to write your own stuff. So really, Michael, I am a total imposter in terms of the music business because everything was homemade. I taught myself to play the guitar wrong. you know. So my technique, all you guitar players out there are listening, all I use is a plectrum on my right hand and my little finger. So it's a 2-finger technique, but it's cack-handed, and it's just stayed that way, and it's given me a sound. So it was purely out of ignorance, trying to work out what these guys were doing, listening to the records, slowing it down, trying to figure out what the notes are, and being passionate. And I think having the desire to make something out of nothing, and that still applies today. I mean, I can read a little bit of music now, but I think the Beatles taught us all that, and Dylan. Oh, I used to sing Dylan stuff. I love Dylan. Was that you don't need to have a degree in music to create music. You know, if you can just master 3 or 4 chords, you can get round. But it's that desire. A lot of guitar players, young players, have asked me my advice about a career, you know, what advice I would give them. And I gave them a couple of bits of advice. And one of them was from the great jazz guitarist, Wes Montgomery. And he said, exploit your limitations. And I thought that, looking back, that's quite zen in actual fact. Because if you exploit it, if you only can play 3 chords, if you do something with those 3 chords, eventually it will lead on to more chords, and eventually you will improve. And the other advice, I said, if you want to make a living out of music, I said, there's a thing in your brain, which you've all got, it's called logic, okay? Not the software, but logic. And I said, what do you have to do? You have to take that out of your brain, put it in a box and forget about it, because logic will tell you there's got to be easier ways to make a living than out of music, right? And I said, if you want to make a living out of music, if you had, and the operative word is desire, if you have the desire to do it, then you will become successful at what you want to do. You may not be a rock star, you may not become famous, but if you can make a living for the rest of your life out of what you love, then you are blessed and privileged. It doesn't matter what that form of teaching. I love teaching. I give guitar lessons. I love passing on knowledge. It's a privilege, and it's part of what I'm all about. You know, pass on what you've learned, what you can do. What you can't teach, you can inspire, but you can't teach somebody to write something that's going to be life-changing, whatever. But you can inspire them to do their own thing, because everybody's creative, no matter what form it takes. Some people don't know what they're good at. Some people don't have the opportunity. So, you know, I was very fortunate. My mum, God rest her soul, bought me a guitar when I was 12 years old. She bought me that guitar, and I learned how to tune it, worked out how to tune the thing, and formed basic chords, and I then took it from there. And I lived in London, so I was a train ride from the West End. I was a train ride from all these major legendary clubs. I could just turn up, hopefully do a floor spot. So location again, you see. A lot of guys who lived up north and wanted to make it in the business had to move down to London and live in some squat somewhere, trying to make a living or trying to feed themselves. I didn't have that. So to a degree, you know, there is a degree of maybe destiny. Maybe that's you do what you're meant to do. You see, I have a personal belief in reincarnation. I believe in previous lives. So maybe what I do now is learn from a previous life, you know, and all the lessons we have to learn. I'm still learning it. You know, wisdom is a very hard thing to find. But that's another thing. We're on the realm of spirituality here, aren't we? But you know, that's what I feel. Right? And there was that still small voice that said, regardless of logic saying, well, you've got no gigs, you've got no work, you've got to do the kids, what are you going to do? You know, for a short time, I did sign on for about 6 weeks, and that was the assistance you got in the UK. Still can. You got jumped through. I didn't want to. I only did it in 6 weeks, and then gigs came in. I was able to sign off and make a living out of about what I do with what I do. But you know, there's no way I could stop doing it. Mainly because music has given me everything. It's given me everything. It's given me life. It's given me self-respect. It's given me joy. It's given me a reason to live, to move forward. And also, fortunately, it makes people happy. You know, so you're given a gift, right? So you have to use it. You must abuse it. So many people sadly abuse it with drugs and alcohol. I've never gone down that road, thank God. And I believe me, come being a sort of child of the 60s, I was surrounded with people all the time that was dropping acid and smoking dope. But I was scared of that kind of stuff. I didn't want anything to control my brain, particularly smoking dope slows you down. I wanted to be the fastest guitarist in the West. You know, I didn't want to slow down. This is what I was good at. I was speedy. I could look how fast I could play, which is meaningless in terms of music. But that's what I had. That was one of my weapons, if you like. It's just great, and I'm just very, very grateful to still be here doing it. You know, that's a miracle. That's another story. I became very ill in 2015 and managed to get through that okay, and I'm still here and still able to do it, which is another joy. You know, fortunately, it's just touching some kind of wood here. You know, the fingers still work. I can still do it. I still got the energy. I still got the health to do it. Please God, long may it continue, because I love it. There's still work to be done. There's still tunes to be right, to be written. You know, so you never really get to the end of that, and you never master the guitar. People say, "Oh, Gordon Giltrap, guitar master." No, I'm not. You know, you can look at people like Django Reinhardt or great jazz musicians, these great geniuses of the guitar. A lot of them are American, of course. You know, Joe Pass and people like that. No, I'm very good at being Gordon Giltrap, Michael. Honestly, and I just want to continue being that and being the best version of what I am, and that's all I hope for.
Well, and that kind of sums it up. we should all aspire to be the best person that we are.
Absolutely, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you are.
Yeah, I do what I can. So I was gonna mention you mentioned reincarnation, past lives, what have you. Yeah, I had read that there were a number of people that had told Henry Mancini that they believed that Verdi had been reincarnated as Henry Mancini.
Yeah.
So
did he think that?
Unfortunately, I never got a chance to talk to him, but from what I'd read, he was open to the idea, but given his ability to create such amazing melodies, it's wouldn't be a far stretch, for if Verdi was to be reincarnated as somebody else, he could have done a lot worse than Henry Mancini.
Well, absolutely. Of course, I've chatted with Pete Townsend about this. Pete's a spiritual pod, I said, I write this stuff, Pete, and I feel as though it's come from somewhere else, because it's quite, it's lovely stuff. It's complex. It's very, it's not easy stuff, and it has an element to it which is called melody, right? Simple as that. You've got to have a tune. And I said, I feel as though somebody else has written. He said, well, let me turn this on its head, Gordon. He said, it's your fingers, it's your muscle memory, and you're good at your job. I said, okay. But I still feel inside that it comes from somewhere else. I'm sure a lot of people feel that. You're right. I mean, when Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday, he kept asking people, I must have got this tune from somewhere else. I mean, have you heard this? No.
Mm-hmm.
My dear late friend Don Newman, who's one of the great string arrangers in the world, worked with everybody, including Paul McCartney, and he told me a wonderful story. He was around Linda McCartney and Paul's house, or the McCartneys in the 70s, and he's having dinner with them. And Paul said, "Darling, I've just written this tune. I want to play it to you." So we sat on the piano, and the tune went. Dun, 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 dun. He said to Dale, "What do you think?" And Dale said, "I think you should finish that, Paul. It's good." And then it became The Long and Winding Road. But it's just we just pluck it out of the air, and if you've got the gift, then you do it. You just do it. A little kind of light bulb went on in my head. In around about 1970, when I was watching TV, and there was, funnily enough, an advert for cigars, and the music that was playing was absolutely wonderful. And I had an uncle that was really quite a cultured guy, and I said to him, his name was Albert, funnily enough. I said, Uncle Albert, I said, that tune for that cigar advert, what is it? He said, that's written by Edward Elgar. It's called Nimrod. And I thought, wow. I thought, that's what I want to do. I really want to write tunes. That's really that's how we communicate. A great tune, you can't beat a great tune. And hopefully you can write a tune that might get the tingle factor going with people. It's the thing I call the resonance of truth. And you can apply that to a lot of great music, from the greatest to the least. And maybe some of my pieces have got that resonance of truth. And I know that people have told me that. And they've told me that my music has changed their life. I know, I mentioned the Visionary album. I kind of got off the track a bit, but I did this album in 1976 called The Visionary, inspired by the poems, or some of the poems and paintings of the English visionary genius, William Blake. And I was so intense. I mean, I practiced a lot then. I was practicing for 18 hours a day. So I had good chops, over the top and excessive. And I met up with these producers. But when I first wrote it, I conceived it as a piece of Baroque music, early music. It had harpsichords and crumhorns and rebecks and recorders and lutes. And I loved all that stuff, still do. And I took the demos to these guys, these producers that I'd done a session for, and they loved it, but their vision was much bigger than mine, because they could hear it with bass and drums, keyboards, and I was a bit shocked. I said, "What? No." They said, "No, trust me." And of course we did it, and you just work intuitively. I didn't know what I was just doing what was in my heart. And I met the right guys who took that vision and made it a lot bigger. And that album was life-changing for a lot of people. And even now I can listen to it. And some of the stuff on it is very difficult. It's just virtuoso playing without a doubt. But I don't know whether I'd have the energy now or the inclination. But there are a couple of the slower pieces. Funny enough, I was playing this morning. It's really beautiful. And there's one section, I remember writing it, and I stood back and I thought, how did I do that? It's perfect. It works perfectly under the fingers. It flows. It's melodic. Where did that come from? Then you start thinking you're some kind of blooming genius, and then you're in trouble.
Yes.
Then you're in trouble. I remember Bert Judge telling me that. He said, when people start calling you a genius, he said, then forget it. He said, you're really in trouble, because you got that thing to live up to. Now people think that about me. Great, I'll take that on board, sure. But he said, genius isn't being highly intelligent. Genius is just a gift. You're born with it, right? It's like a flower. You keep watering it and it grows. So it's nothing, it's nothing for people to say, we do bow the knee to genius. I bow the knee to Townsend when I'm with him. I can't believe it. I can't believe I'm sat with him and he's my friend. We do bow the knee to that. But he can write this stuff because he's Pete Townsend, and Elgar can write this stuff, and Vaughan Williams can write it because that's what was in them. They're able to do it. That's their gift, So there's degrees of genius, and I might have a little smidgen of it. So thank you very much. I'll run with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've often said that instruments are tools.
Oh, absolutely.
When you could take what's considered the best guitar, but in the hands of one person, it can sound terrible. Put it in the hands of somebody who has that innate talent that you've referenced, and it's an amazing thing to listen to.
It is. It's very true, because I got some guitars here that are absolutely wonderful, but I also got guitars that are made in China that have got my name to them because I helped to design them, and they sound wonderful too. But it's, again, an instrument is what you make it. You see, most people go into a guitar shop and buy a guitar, but then it needs setting up. and they want to learn, but they're thinking, oh, this is making my fingers hurt. And it's because the thing's not set up properly. The strings are too high off the fingerboard, it hurts the fingers. So you're fighting the instrument. But with a good instrument, you know, you work on it, you can make it sound good. You know, I've recorded pieces with a guitar that I bought for £5 from a what would you call a yard sale?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it sounds fantastic. But it's only because I worked at it and I made it work for me, and it sounds great. And the incredible thing, you know, you've touched on something so profound, Michael. You said about an instrument. You know, you can put a great guitar into the hands of somebody, and it can sound awful. But music only exists until you play it. You know, I can sit here with a guitar, right? And they say, well, he's got a guitar. And then suddenly I start playing. And then hopefully the magic happens. A third thing happens. And if you're in a room with people who've a good audience, I had one just over a week ago, it was a great audience. There's an energy going there, back and forth. And you can create magic. You can do that. And it's a wondrous thing. It's intangible. But music is such a wonderful language, but it doesn't exist until you make it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also think that you've got varying. There's the skill level, we'll say, where you can a musician can know, you know, which strings to use, which keys to play on the piano, but that's just the skill level to it. That's the methodical part of it.
Yeah.
What makes it different is that innate talent of which of those strings, which of those keys do you hit, you know, in what order, and, you know, how hard, how soft, how fast, how slow. That is the difference between, you know, a mechanical player, you know, who is technically doing everything right, but there's no soul to it.
Yeah, this is the thing. It's the soul, you see. And if you think about it, all the great electric guitar legends, right? Eric Clapton, Peter Green, Jeff Beck, and the list goes on, really. These are all not speedy guitar players. It's not technically mind-blowing. It's melodic. It's their invention. And Clapton, let's take him as a prime example. I've got a friend of mine who I tour with, John Etheridge, a phenomenal player. He knew Eric Clapton. And he said what people tend to forget or miss the point that when Clapton walked into the studio with John Mayall and they did that album, Eric was playing his pain, his anguish, his troubled childhood, and it all came out through that guitar. And people picked up and they go, wow. So what they're hearing is his soul. That's what they're hearing, you know? And that's what people can relate to. Dave Gilmour of the Floyd, great guitar player. He's not technically brilliant, you know, but what he plays all the right notes. Peter Green. And also, it's just not their ability, it's their creativity. I admire people for their creativity, not their technical prowess. I can be impressed by them. I think that's very, very clever, but it doesn't touch me. It doesn't touch my soul. But it's their creativity. Peter Green, in a short space of time, wrote 4 classics. He wrote Albatross, Man of the World, Oh Well, Green Man Unleash You. And that voice, I went to see Fleetwood Mac in the late 60s. I didn't know much about them. They were just, as far as I was concerned, another blues band. And I turned away. I was chatting to my girlfriend at the time, and then suddenly I heard this voice. And I was looking for the black guy. And it's Peter Green. That voice sounded like an authentic blues man with soul. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And that's what impressed me first and foremost with Peter. And then, of course, later on, it was his creativity, his voice, his tone, his touch, which people still talk about today. I met Peter Green, you know. I went for dinner with him once. And it was an interesting conversation because I foolishly, for my sins, all those years ago, and I wish somebody had been more firm with me, did a cover version of Oh Well. I thought I could bring something to it. Bearing in mind, I can't really sing that great, but I love the riff. And I said to Peter, I said, what do you, because he'd heard it, because I signed with the same label. I said, what do you think of my version of Oh Well? And he leaned across the table, looked at me with those big brown eyes of his and said, you can't cover a classic, man. And it was so true. You know, there's only ever going to be one Peter Green. There's only ever going to be one version of Oh Well that's going to be the best. And that's his. And it's very true.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, all those people that made a difference with the music. I mean, Jeff Beck, of course, is technically unbelievable. He's about, you know, there are great guitar players. Then there was Jeff Beck. Different level, genius. You know, and all the people he worked with, particularly Jimmy Page, and said, you know, us mere mortals can't get anywhere near what you're doing. You know, again, that's intuitive, phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
You can make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up with just 3 notes.
Yep.
Amazing. Yeah.
That's why when you hear remakes, cover versions of songs, especially iconic songs, there's some records that there's no way to improve on. And when somebody tries to do a version of that, it's going to go nowhere because it's there's no truth to it. The original had truth.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it's like I often ask myself, why would you even try to bother to cover that record? Because you're not going to improve it.
I've asked myself since 1978 the same question, 78, 79, when I followed Heartsong with this. And people like it, say, yeah, it's good, it's different, it's a different version, but give me a break. Gordon, biggest mistake. Never mind.
Well, you know, the other side of that for me is if you take something and take it into a different direction. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because for me, the litmus test of a great song is a song that can be recorded in many styles and sound true in each of those styles. So if you're an artist and you record an existing established song and you do something different with it to make it you as the artist, as opposed to imitating the original artist, now you're bringing something to it.
Yeah, that is true. And I think with a great song, and a lot of people have done, I mean, with Dylan, McCartney, so many people have done Yesterday. And a lot of these great artists have done great jobs. And you know, the original artist says, yeah, that's good. That's good. I'll acknowledge that.
Yeah, but a lot of times, you know, back in the 70s, you had a lot of those albums that the labels would put out. Sounds like, you know, whatever the artist is. You know, that's what a lot of cover versions to me, you know, come across as. It's, you know, sounds like, you know, George Harrison.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. But it's not.
Right.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I don't do cover versions, but I know there's one tune I play every night on stage, which was written by a man called Davy Graham. And the first version of this tune I heard was by Burt Jones, which is still the best version, I think. And it's called Angie. And Paul Simon recorded that tune on his very first album, I think. And he did a cracking job of it. Because, I mean, Paul Simon was around just before I was on the scene in the early 60s. He was around the London scene. And he was influenced by Burt Jones. He was influenced by Martin Carthy, all these people. And Paul Simon's a great guitar player, as we know, a great guitar player. And he did a great version of it. And I do that as a tribute to Burt and to Davey. But I've done my own thing on it. You know, I've done it's not exactly note for note. So I thought, what's the point? Bring something new to it. And it goes down, and people love it. They love it.
Mm-hmm.
Goes down the
exactly.
Story. Yeah.
Well, you got a nice version of Here Comes the Sun, where when you hear it, you know what it is, but it also sounds like you.
Oh, you are kind. Yeah. I have a story to tell about that because one of George's closest friends was a guy called Joe Brown. And I sent Joe that copy of Here Comes the Sun. He said, "I'll get it to George." Right. Sadly, I never found out whether he listened to it. But I said to Joe, I said, "Do you think George listened to that?" He said, "Gordon," he said, "he listened to everything." So, yeah, he would have heard it. But I know a lot of people like it. And I'm absolutely touched that you like it. It's a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, again, you weren't doing just a note for note cover of it. You were Gordon. It's Gordon's version of that song. I mean, there's no mistaking that it's George's song.
Yeah.
But, when you're playing it, you add your personality, your style, and it's distinctively you.
Yeah. Also, I played it on a smaller guitar, so it's fairly high pitched. So it's got a brighter sound. And of course, there's no words. But yeah. I occasionally still do it in my shows. People like it. I usually open up by saying, "I'm going to play a tune now." So I've just written it. Hasn't got a title yet, but see what you think. I'll start playing. Of course, see what it's all about. So it's all part of the fun thing on stage,
I'll tell you, a bit ago, you mentioned Visionary. Now, on that, when you were promoting that album, you toured with Renaissance, didn't you?
I did indeed. I was going for Renaissance every night. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Annie Haslam was a guest on our show, and she was wonderful. And to hear her sing every night, that had to be great.
Oh yeah, Annie's a good friend, and she's a northern lass, got a great personality, very rock and roll in many ways. But that voice, it was great fun. I enjoyed touring with them. Occasionally I jam with them backstage, but they didn't. The audience actually allowed me to do that. I don't know, but we jam along. And of course, that wonderful song "Northern Lights." What a great song!
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Annie. How old is Annie now? I think she's a bit older than me. I think Renaissance. Are they no more? Or have they retired?
They were active a while ago, but I'm not sure about now.
Mm.
So
I think Annie may have decided to call it a day. But she's great. She's great. If you speak to her again, please give her my love. We occasionally exchange emails, but wonderful woman.
Yeah. Now your follow-up album to Visionary, Perilous Journey, that had probably one of your best known songs, Heartsong.
It did indeed. It was. Again, that's incredible that that came about because it was I was never a singles artist, an instrumental artist, the esoteric stuff. But it was the obvious one to put out because it was fairly upbeat and fairly cheerful. And I had no idea that when it was released, it would get into the charts. So it reached the number 21 in the singles charts. So I got nominated for an Ivor Novello Award, which is a big deal for that. But in the studio, it's one of those pieces that every time we added something to it, it got better. So you add this lovely top synth. Of course, I had one of the greatest drummers in the world on it, Simon Phillips, for goodness sake. How blessed was that? But from Visionary up until Fear of the Dark, those 3 albums, I had one of the greatest drummers in the world on my albums. Again, you can't write this stuff. And so we were in the studio doing this stuff, and then we said, well, let's try some hand claps. Put some hand claps on. Well, that works. That's great. But when I wrote it, it's obviously a very rhythmic thing, and it's a chord progression, right? I know it sounds crazy, but I only just thought of it as a chord progression. I didn't think of it as actually the top line being replicated on synthesizers. And I thought, hey, that is a good tune. I never thought of it as it being that melodic, but Rod Edwards, one of the producers, brought it to life with that top line playing. It brought out the tune, and it really made it. And of course, Simon's drums, that amazing opening drum break after the rhythmic stuff. Yeah, good old heart. I still play it. I love playing it. And I'm saying to the audience, little did I know when I wrote this in 1977 with all the energy I had then, that I would have to try and play it now at the age of 77 with the same energy. I'm going to try and do it. And I do it, and they love it. But the thing about Heartsong is it's got its own inbuilt forward movement. It's got its own energy. So I start off fairly moderately, and then it starts to build up. And when it builds up, then it's like you've got to keep up with it. It's like an express train. You're clinging on for dear life. I've got to get to the end of this. And it's really, really good. It's lovely to play it.
I'll tell you, I played it for my son, who, when he was younger, used to play the Wii video game system a lot. And one of the games was had a bicycle race in it. And I asked him, I said, "What?" Yes, I played him a Heartsong. I says, "What does this remind you of?" And he's like, "Well, it sounds familiar." So doesn't it sound like this was the inspiration for the music that plays during the Wii bicycle race game? And he says, "Yeah, it does." So I don't know if I mean, it's not a direct copy or any way, but the spirit of Heartsong is prominent, at least to my ears and my sons, in that.
Wow, great! So they did actually use Heartsong for the Wii.
No, they didn't use it, but it was if it wasn't the people who did the music for it, it had to have been an inspiration. Because you can hear it.
That's fantastic. It's going to be an influence.
Yeah, but now your album, The Peacock Party.
Yeah,
I think that one, the first two songs on that, I think really embody or a nice summation, if you will, because you open with the Headwind, electric. Then you go into Magpie Rag, acoustic.
Yeah, I know. What a piece that is. I mean, I couldn't play that now. My hands don't work quite like that. But again, looking back, you think, my goodness. Like the other track on it, the Taylor Bird, it's a killer. You sort of think, couldn't I have made it simpler? It was relentless. But again, 1981 it came out. I was that much younger, that much more energy, so whatever. I've got to tell you, Michael, as we're chatting, I'm absolutely thrilled that you even know anything about me. Yeah.
I love music.
Yeah, I didn't think anybody knew of me in the States at all. Maybe that's still the case. Who knows?
Well, my whole life, basically, I've been on a quest finding new music, or at least new to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, for example, the record store that I would go to, where I would save up my money, and Saturdays I would go in, and I was always someone who read liner notes, and I would pay attention to who's the songwriters, who's the producers, who's the musicians, and when I would go through the used LPs, I would look. Okay, I really like this producer or these songwriters or these players, and when I would see records that had those people on it, I would take a chance on that I would like the music, even though I wasn't familiar with the artist, and that allowed me to get into people I wouldn't have otherwise.
Well, that's great. That's really great. I'm delighted. Delighted you like my stuff.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So now for you, having done electric, having done acoustic, having done folk, you've done classical, which one for you is the one that you look forward to playing to the most?
Well, essentially, I'm a solo guitar player, so it's going to be the high point, I think, of my, if you like, of my career in terms of the height of my powers was an album called Troubadour, which came out in 1997. And that to me was a perfect album. Every track I'm proud of. I still play pieces from it. A particular piece called Isabella's Wedding. I played from it. I played a piece called The Dublin Day the other night because somebody requested it. So that to me is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
So, and again, in all the different things that styles that will say that you've played, the thing that remains through all of them is when you hear it, you know who it is. It's you, whether you're on electric or whether you're doing, an acoustic folk or classical guitar.
That is amazing. Thank you for saying that. I think that's true. I mean, you listen to one of my favorite guitar players, Mark Knopfler, but he's everybody's favorite guitar player. But as soon as you hear him play, you know it's him. Mm-hmm. It's his tone, it's his sound. And it's interesting that maybe even my electric playing comes through because it's still essentially acoustic, but it's very clean, it's very precise. Many years ago, I've got another story for you. 1970, I'd got an album on the label called The Ace of Clubs, and it was called The Quintet of the Hot Club of France. And it was Django Reinhardt. And I listened to it, and it was just, Django was amazing. And I thought, I've got to learn to play this stuff. I've got to play this. And I worked out a few things of like a few of the licks, Honeysuckle Rose and stuff like that. And I rang a friend of mine up who was he was basically a famous guitar collector. He had the most incredible collection of Martin guitars, of which I was able to play occasionally. They were just beautiful. And I rang him up. I said, John, his name was John Pierce. I said, John, I need to get hold of a McAferry, which is the model of the Django plate, Silver McAferry. And he said, yeah, I can get you one. Because he knew the guys at that time that had them. There's a man called Louis Gallo. And there was these little clubs that would play Django stuff. Very small audience, really, at that time. He said, but why do you want a McAferry? I said, well, I want to play like Django. He said, Gordon, why do you want to play like Django? I said, well, he's fantastic. He said, Gordon, I've got to tell you, you have got the most unique style of anybody I've ever heard. He said, don't try and copy somebody else. You've got it there. But he said, people can spend a lifetime trying to get their own sound. He said, you've got it already. From that point on, I forgot about playing like Django. It's the best piece of advice anybody could give me because he was telling the truth. When I play, people say, I mean, I'm so close to what I play, I think it sounds like me, I'm just doing my thing. But I mean, people say, oh yeah, I recognize your stuff in a few seconds. Sounds like you. It's my tone, it's probably some of the licks that I play, some of the inspiration. But yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
Exactly. Well, we're all sponges. So we take what we're exposed to,
Absolutely.
is going to influence what we do.
Yeah.
But it's, those that have that innate talent, that gift, whatever you want to call it, can take all those influences and create something personal, something distinctly theirs.
Yeah. That's true. I guess, again, I'm very, very lucky. I got to tell you, buddy, I'm still in wonder of it all. I look back on my life, the good times, some of the sad times, which I will share with you. I lost my son in 2018. I lost my wife 2 years ago. So one is dealing with that lifelong thing of grief. But all that aside, that is life. That happens to all of us. You have to deal with it, try to come to terms with it. But all that aside, I look back on my life, I think, how did that happen? How did this happen? I left school at 15 with nothing. Nobody taught me anything. And here I am, age of 77. I have the respect from the people that I think are wonderful. People come and see me. I'm not a stadium artist, that's for sure. But if I can get 100 people at a concert, I'm happy, and they go away happy. I'm happy. I make a living out of it. I was awarded an MBE in 2019. I stood in front of our king. You can't write this stuff, Michael. You can't write it. So, thank you, Lord. I'm very happy. I'm very fortunate. I just wanted to continue as long as I can. I'm very fortunate that Love has now come back into my life again with a dear friend I've known for 40 years. I didn't expect that. Because there's no way I was going to spend the rest of my life on my own. No way, because I'm a people person. I'm a needy person. I have a lot of love in me, which I want to share. I have a lot of music in me, which is the same thing that I want to share. So one tries to move forward.
Yeah. Tell me this. When you were 12, first picking up that guitar, if somebody would have told you that you would end up as an MBE, what would your response have been?
I would have think those on medication. I think I would have probably. I think I would have thought they're weird for a start, because that's just ridiculous. Maybe they need some kind of counselling or something, because it's just crazy. You don't know that. Although I think my mum, bless her heart, knew. She always said, I knew you'd always be on the stage. She knew there was something within me that needed to come out, and she encouraged it. Dad didn't. Dad had no idea about me. Bless his heart. And that's the way dads are. He's from a different generation. He had no idea about my talent, what I could do. But when I became known, when he started to realise that this was special, he kind of respected what I was doing, without a doubt. But Mum knew. She knew that there was something special, and I think, and bless her, she was still with us when I got that recognition with Heartsong, and people, I would be selling out concerts. So that's a lovely thing to know that Mum saw all that happen, saw the Ivor Novello Award, saw me being nationally recognised. So that's a lovely thing. Sadly, she died. She was only 58 when she passed. I owe her. Without Mum buying me that guitar, I don't think maybe it would have happened. Maybe there would have been that desire, but at the age of 12, which is a good age, most of the guitar players I know started around about 12 years old. And Mum and Dad, or somebody bought them their first guitar. I mean, Mark Knopfler's father. Somebody had to buy you your first guitar. Albert Lee's Mum and Dad bought him his guitar when he was 12. And little did they know that this guy would be this great country rock guitar player. Just unbelievable. But you see, with Albert, I don't even know this, but Albert is gypsy. Did you know that? You knew
No,
that?
did not know that.
You did not know that. Albert Lee, there's a very famous gypsy family, and there's a famous gypsy called Gypsy Rose Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And Albert comes from the Lee family.
Okay, now that makes sense.
That makes sense. But also, if you listen to him play, he has the fire of the gypsy. And that's why people step back in amazement. All those great Nashville guys, all of them, you name it, they step back and they bow the knee to Albert, because they don't have that. They got the chops, but they don't have the fire that Albert has. He could just stand there on stage, legs wide apart, head bent, and my God, it happens. The fire comes out, and it's just the energy. I don't think even knows how he does it, but he does it. He's always been there. Only at 14 years old, because he lived locally, he used to play in a club locally to where the school was. The guy, I used to have a kid come in, and he said, "I was at the coffee bar last night. Albert Lee." Who's Albert Lee? Oh, Albert Lee. Oh, fantastic guitar player. Albert must have been about 15 or 16 then, maybe 16. But he was doing all that stuff with Chris Farlow and the Thunderbirds. So it was all there. It was all there. And it came out. Of course, Albert went to grammar school. He's a very bright boy. He's a grammar school boy, right? But he had to leave school because gigs would get in the way of the study. He had to leave because he had all these gigs. At 16, off to Germany, whatever. Had no choice. Thank God he did. Thank goodness he did.
Yeah, I first became aware of Albert when I saw a clip of Dave Edmunds, when Albert played on a session. Yeah, and Dave Edmunds was just, completely in awe of Albert's playing.
Yeah, you would have. Dave Edmunds is no mean guitar player. He's a great guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think I became aware of Albert. Funnily enough, I was on a program called Country Meets Folk, and there was a band called Country Fever, because Albert was trying to make a living with country bands over here. And he's only till he had to move to America to get the recognition. And there was this guy on stage playing the most amazing stuff. I didn't know who he was. Stage afterwards, I found out it was Albert Lee. He was immaculate, playing mandolin.
Wow.
But I first heard his playing with Head, Hands and Feet, with Country Boy. And then you go, oh my goodness. And then I ended up supporting him in Germany, and we've just become very, very close friends. Very close. I love him like a brother, really. Bless him. He's a great man, and the most modest man on the planet, of course. You know, he's so humble. And I think the only reason why Albert, and somebody mentioned it recently, I forget what it was, Albert is not a mega star, which he deserves to be, is because he doesn't have much charisma on stage. You know, he's very shy, and he just walks on, he hunched, and he just plugs in and plays, and, you know, that was called so-and-so, now I'm going to do a Jimmy Webb. And of course he sits at the piano and plays exquisite piano, and that voice, you know, what a gift. He could do all that, because he played piano before he played guitar. You know, his parents were, you know, he had piano lessons. But it was really Country Boy, and he'd go, how does he do that? But if you actually analyse what Albert plays, it's very jazzy. It's all that jazz stuff is in there. It's jazz, but it's tinged with country. He calls it Western swing, really. But it's, and of course the people he's listening to, who was a great guy he was listening to way back? Jimmy somebody. And so he was listening to all those people. He was listening to who was Elvis's guitar player? Who was Elvis's guitar player?
Oh, I knew it until you asked me.
I know. Yeah, another legend. James Burton.
Yes.
James Burton. He was listening to James Burton, and all those, and Chet Atkins, and of course he had a great guitar player that wrote The Claw. What's his name? Is he Lee? Somebody Lee? Oh, it's crazy, isn't it? Legendary.
Yeah. Jerry Reed?
Jerry Reed. Thank you. Jerry Reed. And so Albert was listening to all those guys anyway. Mm-hmm. So, you know, he was completely absorbed in that stuff.
Jerry Reed was an amazing player.
Oh, astonishing. Astonishing. I mean, The Claw. Mm-hmm. All played on nylon strings. Didn't play steel strings, you know. And of course, the great Chet Atkins. Oh, Chet. Genius. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. You know, and we'll never see the likes of them again. There's nobody going to be as good as that. Nobody. Everybody's kind of as good as they are. They're really doing stuff that's already been there. They're just carrying the torch, if you like, for the blue. Mm-hmm. Joe Bonamassa carrying the torch of that stuff. And the other great guitar player who was in Deep Purple. Who's Deep Purple's guitar player? My goodness.
Ritchie Blackmore?
Ritchie Blackmore. I only spoke to Ritchie on the phone once years ago when I was writing a book on Hofner guitars. And I rang him up. And I found out later, he thinks I walk on water.
I was going to say, there's a very nice quote from him about you.
And, you know, I have to qualify that. People say, well, he thinks you're the greatest acoustic guitarist in the world. I said, look, let's get this in perspective. That's his opinion. And that's great. And I respect it. He knows what he's talking about. And so there's something about my music that's touched the man. And he thinks, I'm the man. But it's nonsense. There's no such thing as the greatest. It doesn't exist. Certainly not Gordon Giltrap. Certainly not me, you know. But thank you. I will take that, Ritchie. Bless you. I will take that. And I didn't. Again, you just deal. You have no idea the influence she was having. Like the man I'd always wanted to work with was Pete Townsend. And then I played on the Who's last album, but unfortunately, it got wiped off. So it says on that track, Gordon Giltrap, I'm not on it. The producer wiped it.
Mm-hmm.
Albert was furious. Pete was furious. And so he's a man I've always wanted to work with. But what is the point of what I'm saying? I lost the thread here. But the thing is, it doesn't matter with Pete. The friendship's more important than actually making the music. But I didn't know what an influence I'd been on him. It's only when we became friends he started telling me his favourite album, mine, is Perilous Journey. It's through my work with Simon Phillips that he chose Simon to play on his solo albums because he loved the work that Simon did with Gordon Giltrap. I had no idea. Thank goodness I didn't, because I don't think I could have got through a door. My head would have been like this, you know. And so you have no idea. You have no idea. And Peter and I have spoken about this often, like with the Fear of the Dark album. He said the great thing about that album, he said, and I won't use the expletive, but he said, it sounds so effing great. He said those guys knew what they were doing when they produced me. But you see, those guys had worked with George Martin, who of course worked with the Beatles. So I had a direct line to the Beatles, unbeknown to me, because they were taking all that influence and bringing it to the table. You know.
Yeah.
Michael, I've never made a shed load of money. I've got to tell you this, but I wouldn't change any of it. Wouldn't change any of it. What I've been privileged to have been involved with is just, I can't find the words really.
Yeah, well, you've been able to play with a lot of folks, including Rick Wakeman. Yes,
I mean, yeah, my dear friend Rick. We did this album called Brush and Stone about 13 years ago, and Rick was so busy at the time, he didn't have the time to get behind it to promote it because he's in the States with John Anderson. And so basically it came out and died. But I recently reconnected with my record company boss, Rob Ailing. And I said, it'd be great to get Brush and Stone out. And he said, yeah, let's do it. And it's come out in this double gatefold sleeve, high-end, two versions. One's a slower speed recording, a clear vinyl, heavy. The cover is unbelievable, stunning piece of kit. So that's lovely. That's a lovely thing that's happened this year. And also Rob wants to get all my back catalogue out there in box sets. Again, it's having the time to do it. So yes, a lot of stuff happening. I've just finished an album, which is not out until September, with a very dear friend of mine called Nicholas Hooper. Remember that name, because Nicholas Hooper is one of the great film composers. Everybody's heard of John Williams, but Nicholas Hooper wrote the music for 2 Harry Potter movies, 2 of them. And he wrote a piece called Dumbledore's Farewell, and they still use it in all the future Harry Potter movies because they can't improve on it. It's like the best. He's a very dear friend of mine. We've just done a guitar duo album, and today he's just come out of hospital. He just had major heart surgery and he's fine, I hope. I spoke to him last week. So there's a lot of stuff happening.
And you got an EP out too, don't you?
Yeah, I've got this EP called Starfield. Do you have those tracks? Have you? I know we've,
yes, I have listened to it.
Great. Okay. Well, the opening track, I'd love you if you'd be so kind to play on the show, because it's something that's very special to me. With the voice of Susie Wall. Unbelievable. But that's really, it's an EP, but there's more material to come, and that would be part of a new Giltrap album at some point, I'm sure.
Sounds good.
Yeah. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Likewise, I appreciate you taking the time to join us, and this works out perfect timing, for our show. Now, before we wrap it up, Gordon, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure that we do before we bring it to a close?
I think we've covered so much, more stuff than I actually thought we would. We'd be chatting for as long as we have. It's great. Would you use all of this material?
You know what? On music night, we just it goes where it goes. You know, sometimes it wraps up short. Sometimes the conversation's going. It just goes. So, but I'll tell you what, I think that's a good spot to bring it to a close, Gordon. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join us. Everybody, thank you for watching. Have a good night.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.